What if I told you that the most influential leadership moment in human history wasn't a battle speech or a political rally, but a simple dinner? The Last Supper wasn't just about bread and wine. It was a masterclass in psychological influence so powerful that it transformed 12 ordinary men into leaders who would reshape civilization. Tonight, I'm going to reveal the 3 hidden psychological principles Jesus used that night. Principles so effective, they're still being studied by leadership experts 2,000 years later. These aren't religious teachings. These are raw psychological strategies that work whether you believe or not. And by the end of this video, you'll never see leadership the same way again. If you're building a team, leading people, or trying to create lasting change, the most powerful influence methods in history were hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. What you're about to discover will change everything. Here's what most people completely miss about the Last Supper. They focus on the bread, the wine, the betrayal prediction, but they ignore the most psychologically sophisticated move Jesus made that night. Before the meal even began, this man who commanded crowds of thousands, who was revered as a teacher and leader, did something that shocked his disciples to their core. He got down on his hands and knees and washed their feet. Now you have to understand what this meant in that culture. Foot washing was the job of the lowest servant in the household. It was literally beneath everyone else. Roads were dusty, filled with animal waste, and people walked everywhere in sandals. This wasn't like washing someone's hands before dinner. This was the most degrading, humiliating task imaginable. When Peter saw what was happening, he was horrified. He said, "You will never wash my feet." Why? Because everything Peter understood about power and leadership was being turned upside down. This wasn't just a nice gesture. This was a calculated psychological move that most leadership experts today completely misunderstand. We're taught that leaders should project strength, confidence, never show weakness. Modern corporate culture tells us to always appear in control, to never let them see you sweat. But Jesus understood something that modern psychology has only recently discovered: the vulnerability effect. When someone in a position of power shows calculated vulnerability, it doesn't make them appear weak. It triggers something much more powerful in the human brain. It creates what researchers call psychological safety. But more than that, it establishes what we now know as authentic leadership. This analysis suggests that Jesus wasn't just being humble, he was deploying one of the most sophisticated influence techniques ever recorded in human history. What Jesus understood that night was what psychologists now call the pratfall effect. When someone competent makes a small mistake or shows vulnerability, it actually makes them more likable and trustworthy, not less. But here's the critical insight. It only works if the person is already seen as competent. Jesus had already established his authority. He had performed miracles, commanded crowds, challenged the religious establishment. His competence was unquestioned. So when he knelt down and washed their feet, he wasn't showing weakness. He was demonstrating the ultimate form of strength, the confidence to be vulnerable. This interpretation reveals that he triggered 3 powerful psychological responses in his disciples simultaneously. First, it created cognitive dissonance. Their brains couldn't process how someone so powerful could do something so humble. This forced them to reconstruct their entire understanding of leadership. Think about this from a neurological perspective. When we experience cognitive dissonance, our brains literally rewire themselves to resolve the conflict. The disciples' mental models of authority were permanently altered that night. They couldn't go back to their old understanding of power dynamics because Jesus had shown them something impossible according to their existing framework. Second, it activated reciprocity, but not just simple reciprocity. This was reciprocity amplified by status reversal. When someone does something unexpectedly generous for us, we feel obligated to return the favor. But when someone of higher status serves someone of lower status, the psychological debt created is exponentially greater. The disciples didn't just feel gratitude, they felt a life-altering sense of obligation. Third, and most importantly, it created what modern organizational psychology calls psychological safety. By showing vulnerability first, Jesus gave his disciples permission to be vulnerable too. This is crucial because real loyalty only develops when people feel safe to be their authentic selves. Fear-based loyalty crumbles under pressure, but loyalty built on psychological safety becomes stronger with each challenge. But here's what's truly brilliant about this move. Jesus wasn't just building loyalty for that moment. He was programming a template into their minds. He was showing them exactly how to lead others when he was gone. Every time they would later lead their own followers, they would remember this moment. The image of their leader on his knees would be burned into their memory forever, creating a leadership philosophy that would spread across the globe. Think of leadership like a bank account. Most leaders make the mistake of only making deposits, showing their expertise, their success, their strength. But Jesus understood that sometimes the biggest deposit you can make is a calculated withdrawal. It's like a billionaire showing up to help you move your apartment. That single act of humility would mean more to you than any expensive gift because it demonstrates that their relationship with you transcends the normal rules of status and hierarchy. When you lead with vulnerability first, you're not showing weakness. You're showing such confidence in your position that you can afford to be human. It's the difference between a dictator who rules through fear and a king who rules through love. The dictator constantly has to prove his power because it's fragile. The king's power is so secure that he can afford to serve others. Jesus turned the entire hierarchy upside down, and by doing so, he created followers who would die for him, not because they feared him, but because they understood that he had already died for them, symbolically, the moment he knelt down with that basin of water. This is why the most effective leaders throughout history have understood the power of strategic vulnerability. It's not about being weak. It's about being strong enough to appear weak when it serves a greater purpose. What we can learn from this analysis is that authentic leadership requires the courage to break conventional expectations. In our modern context, this might mean a CEO working alongside entry-level employees or a manager admitting they don't have all the answers. The principle remains the same. True authority comes from serving others, not from being served. If this is blowing your mind, stop right now and hit the subscribe button. Why? Because what comes next will blow up your view on influence and leadership. And if you don't subscribe, the algorithm will hide my next secrets from you. Now, here's the second principle that most people completely miss. Throughout the entire Last Supper, Jesus kept emphasizing one thing over and over. This is the last time. He didn't just mention it once. He wove it through everything like a psychological thread. I will not drink of this fruit of the vine again until I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Where I am going, you cannot come. Little children, I shall be with you a little while longer. One of you will betray me tonight. Why was he doing this? Was he just being sentimental? Absolutely not. This analysis suggests that Jesus was deploying one of the most powerful psychological principles known to human behavior, scarcity combined with urgency. But he wasn't just using it to manipulate them. He was using it to etch this experience so deeply into their minds that they would never forget it. Here's what most people don't understand about memory formation. Our brains don't record experiences like a video camera. They prioritize what to remember based on emotional intensity and perceived importance. Jesus was artificially amplifying both factors simultaneously. By constantly reminding them that this was their last time together, he was triggering loss aversion, the psychological principle that shows we feel losses twice as strongly as gains. But there's something even more sophisticated happening here. Jesus wasn't just creating urgency about losing him. He was creating urgency about them becoming who they needed to become. Every time he said, "This is the last time," he was subtly communicating, "Your childhood is over. Your training is complete. Tomorrow you become the leaders." Consider the psychological impact of this approach. When we know something is ending, we pay attention differently. We notice details we would normally miss. We engage more deeply. We try to extract every possible value from the experience because we know we won't get another chance. Jesus was essentially turning their entire evening into what psychologists call a peak experience, a moment of such intensity and meaning that it reshapes how we see ourselves and our purpose. What Jesus understood that night was something modern marketers have spent billions of dollars trying to figure out: how to make something unforgettable. The secret isn't repetition. It's not even emotional intensity alone. It's the anticipation of loss combined with the promise of transformation. When Jesus said, "This is my body, broken for you," he wasn't just creating a religious ritual. He was creating what psychologists call a flashbulb memory. Flashbulb memories are those super vivid memories we have of significant moments, like where you were during 9/11, your first kiss, or when you got your dream job. These memories feel more real than regular memories because they were formed under conditions of high emotional arousal and perceived significance. Jesus was artificially creating these conditions with surgical precision. But here's the genius part. He wasn't just making the moment memorable for its own sake. He was programming a trigger into their minds. Every time they would later break bread or drink wine, which happened multiple times every day in their culture, they would be transported back to this moment. They would remember not just what happened, but how it felt to be chosen, to be trusted with something bigger than themselves. This interpretation reveals that Jesus connected the scarcity message to physical objects they would encounter constantly. It's like he planted mental time bombs throughout their future lives. Every meal would remind them of their mission. Every cup of wine would remind them of their purpose. He wasn't just creating a memory. He was creating a lifestyle trigger that would activate their sense of mission for the rest of their lives. And think about this from a behavioral psychology perspective. These men went on to face torture, persecution, and death rather than abandon their mission. That level of commitment doesn't come from fear or even belief alone. It comes from having an experience so powerful, so perfectly designed to create psychological ownership that betraying it would feel like betraying themselves. Jesus also understood the power of what we now call implementation intentions. By connecting his message to daily activities, he was ensuring that his followers would be constantly reminded of their commitment. Modern research shows that linking new behaviors to existing habits is one of the most effective ways to create lasting change. Jesus was doing this 2,000 years before we had the science to explain why it works. The scarcity principle also created what economists call sunk cost fallacy in reverse. Instead of people continuing bad investments because they've already invested so much, Jesus created a situation where people would continue good investments because the initial experience was so profound that abandoning it would feel like wasting something irreplaceable. Imagine you're a collector and someone shows you a one-of-a-kind artifact that's worth millions. Then they tell you it's going to be destroyed tomorrow, but first they want to give it to you to hold for one night, and they want to teach you how to create similar artifacts yourself. How would that feel? You'd probably hold it differently than if they said you could see it anytime you wanted. You'd examine every detail. You'd memorize every scratch, every curve, every imperfection, because you know you'll never get this exact chance again. That's exactly what Jesus did with his time. He turned their last dinner into a one-of-a-kind artifact that they could carry with them forever. But unlike a physical object that might break or get lost, he stored it in their minds and connected it to things they'd see every day for the rest of their lives. This is why the most powerful experiences aren't always the happiest ones. They're the ones where we know, in real time, that we're living through something irreplaceable. Jesus didn't just create a memory that night. He created what we might call a sacred wound. A wound that would heal into the strongest part of their identity. Every time doubt crept in, every time they faced persecution, every time they questioned their purpose, they could reach back to that moment and remember, I was there. I was chosen. I was trusted with something bigger than myself. I have work to do. What we can apply from this analysis is that creating urgency and scarcity around meaningful experiences makes them more valuable and memorable. In our modern context, this might mean being fully present during important conversations, creating special traditions with our teams, or marking significant transitions with intentional rituals that anchor the experience in memory. If you're still watching, you are different from most people. Prove it. Leave your like now and subscribe, because people like you deserve to know all the secrets I'll reveal in the next videos. But here's the third and most sophisticated principle Jesus used that night. And it's so subtle that most people miss it entirely. Throughout the entire evening, Jesus kept doing something that seems almost contradictory. While he was emphasizing that this was their last time together, he was simultaneously transferring his authority to them. You are those who have continued with me in my trials, and I bestow upon you a kingdom, just as my Father bestowed one upon me. When the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all truth. Greater works than these will you do. Wait, what? He's leaving, but he's also giving them a kingdom. He's departing, but they're going to do greater works than him. This seems like a contradiction until you understand what's really happening here. This analysis suggests that Jesus was executing what psychologists now call legacy transfer, but he wasn't waiting until after he was gone to do it. He was doing it in real time, with them watching, so they could see exactly how authority is passed down. This is crucial because most leadership transitions fail. Why? Because the old leader either holds on too long, creating dependence, or disappears too suddenly, creating chaos. Jesus found the perfect middle ground. He was psychologically present for his own succession. He was showing them, step by step, how to receive authority, and more importantly, how to transfer it to others when their time came. But there's something even more brilliant happening. By transferring authority while emphasizing his departure, Jesus was creating what psychologists call psychological ownership. When you earn something while simultaneously being told you're losing the person who gave it to you, you don't just feel responsible for the gift. You feel responsible for honoring the giver. It's possible to interpret this as Jesus understanding that the most powerful form of influence is the kind that makes itself unnecessary. Instead of creating dependence, he was creating independence. Instead of building followers who would collapse without him, he was building leaders who would thrive in his absence. This is the mark of truly transformational leadership. It creates more leaders, not more followers. What Jesus understood that night was something that modern organizational psychology has only recently discovered: the difference between appointed authority and earned authority. You can appoint someone to a position, but you can't appoint them to leadership. Real leadership has to be earned in the minds of the followers. And the best way to ensure someone earns authority is to give them the opportunity to choose it rather than just receive it. This is why Jesus didn't just say, "You're in charge now." Instead, he created a situation where they had to step up. He told them about his betrayal, his departure, their future challenges. He was essentially saying, "Here's what's coming. Here's what needs to be done. Here's what I'm trusting you with. Now, what are you going to do about it?" He was forcing them to mentally rehearse accepting responsibility while he was still there to guide them through it. But here's the most sophisticated part. Jesus was teaching them not just how to lead, but how to transfer leadership to others. Every principle he used that night, vulnerability, scarcity, legacy transfer, he was modeling for them to use with their own future followers. He wasn't just creating followers, he was creating a system for creating followers. It's like he built a psychological franchise model. This interpretation reveals why Christianity didn't die with Jesus. It's why it actually grew stronger after his death. Most movements collapse when their founder dies because the followers were dependent on the leader's presence. But Jesus had spent 3 years, and this final night especially, making them psychologically independent. He made them feel like they were carrying on his work, not just following his orders. The disciples didn't just learn what to do, they learned how to think. They didn't just inherit a message, they inherited a method. And that method was so powerful that they went on to teach it to others, who taught it to others, creating the largest movement in human history. Jesus also understood what we now call empowerment leadership. By explicitly transferring authority while he was still present, he was ensuring that his followers felt empowered rather than abandoned. Modern research shows that employees who feel empowered by their leaders are more creative, more committed, and more likely to take initiative. Jesus was creating this psychological state 2,000 years ago. The legacy transfer technique also solved what psychologists call the succession problem. Most organizations struggle when their founder or key leader leaves because they haven't prepared the next generation to carry on the vision. Jesus solved this by making succession planning part of the original vision. He wasn't just building a movement, he was building a movement that could reproduce itself indefinitely. Think of it like this. Most people, when they're leaving a company or a position, either disappear suddenly like pulling off a band-aid, or they try to hang on too long, micromanaging from the sidelines. Both approaches fail catastrophically, but imagine a master craftsman who knows he's retiring. Instead of just handing over his tools or hovering over your shoulder forever, he spends his last day teaching you not just how to use them, but how to make them. He shows you not just the techniques, but the thinking behind the techniques. And most importantly, he teaches you how to teach others. That's what Jesus did that night. He didn't just hand them a religion. He taught them how to build movements. He didn't just give them a message. He showed them how to create messages that would stick in people's hearts forever. He was like a master chef who doesn't just give you his best recipe, but teaches you how to create recipes that will feed people's souls. This is why the Last Supper wasn't just a farewell dinner. It was a masterclass in succession planning. Jesus understood that the best leaders don't just build great teams. They build teams that can build great teams. He wasn't just creating followers for himself. He was creating leaders for the future. And the proof that it worked? 2,000 years later, we're still talking about what happened in that room. The movement he started that night has reached every corner of the globe. Survived empires rising and falling, adapted to countless cultures and languages, all because he understood how to transfer not just authority, but the ability to transfer authority. What we can learn from this analysis is that true leadership succession requires intentional preparation. In our modern context, this means mentoring others not just in what to do, but in how to think and how to develop others. The most successful leaders create cultures that outlast their own tenure. So there you have it. The 3 psychological principles that changed 12 men and ultimately changed the world. The vulnerability strategy, showing that true strength comes from the confidence to be human. The scarcity and urgency principle, creating experiences so powerful they become permanent parts of someone's identity. And the legacy transfer technique, teaching people not just what to do, but how to think and how to create their own leaders. These principles work whether you're leading a startup, managing a team, or raising a family. The question isn't whether these techniques are powerful. History has proven that. The question is, will you use them to create positive change in your world? If these secrets blew your mind, you need to see my next videos. But only if you hit the bell icon. Otherwise, you'll lose the most powerful secrets in history. What is your opinion on the ideas presented in this content? Leave it in the comments. Send this news to that friend of yours who has a keen perception. This analysis is speculative and based on historical and psychological interpretation of biblical accounts, not clinical diagnosis.